Alright, so it's an overcast day here in Moss Beach. I'm going to try to make something of the scene behind me. As usual, I'll be using the scene as inspiration. I plan on moving some of the shapes around just to make for a better composition. I'll be painting on a 16 by 24 inch gessoed panel, and I'll be using my usual palette of colors. I'm using a number 3 natural bristle filbert to sketch out the composition. And I'm using burnt sienna, which I've thinned with mineral spirits. I'm just trying to arrange the big shapes. There are a couple houses in this composition. There's obviously the one up close, but then there's this one which is barely visible. There's a bunch of trees or shrubs that are obscuring it. See, there's some cypress like this. Taking a little bit longer on this composition than I usually do, just because it's a little bit more complicated. And also I'm exploring subject matter that I don't usually paint here in California, which is architecture next to the ocean. And part of the reason that I haven't painted a lot of architecture near the ocean is because there isn't a lot here in Northern California in particular. I've switched over to a number 6 natural bristle flat, and I'm mixing up a dark using ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and a little bit of alizarin crimson. I'm feeling like blocking in the darks will help me clarify the composition. Because I was exploring, things got a little bit messy, so establishing the darks will hopefully clarify things a bit. And I'm using the same dark mixture for the rocks. I'm mostly focusing on value at this point as opposed to color. I just want to establish my light-dark pattern. As I've mentioned before, the light-dark pattern really is the composition. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of sunlight yet today. I'm still hoping that the sun will come out. The house in the foreground does have a deck that extends out a bit. And there's a shrub right here. I'm using a 2:3 ratio panel because I want to include the house. If it was more of a square panel, I would lose a lot of the water here. I've got a dark olive green mixture for the ice plant growing on this cliff. There are also areas of exposed sand on these cliffs, so I'm going to leave some open spaces for some sand color. Still focusing on shapes. Got a green mixture here I made using ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow medium, and a bit of burnt sienna. There's some ice plant in the foreground. And I plan to keep the greens in the foreground a bit warmer than the greens in the distance. And I feel like that helps to create a feeling of depth. If the sun does come out, I will make adjustments to the colors. All right, so now mapping out the dark water pattern, and I'm using the dark shapes to delineate the light shapes. In other words, I'm leaving the white water unpainted. This is something I do a lot when painting watercolor, but I also do it when oil painting as well. Of course, this is just the first pass. Even though this panel is a 16 by 24, it feels a little bit cramped. It would be nice to have a bit more room just because there's a lot of detail here. And as you guys know, I like to keep things loose, and it is going to be a challenge to keep things loose because this panel does feel a bit small. and so there's not as much room to swing the brush. But we shall see. There are some interesting effects happening in the sky. I'm not sure if they're going to work because the shapes are really broken up, but I am just quickly trying to capture what I see, and then if there are elements that are working, I'll build on those elements, and if it's not working, I can just wipe it down and try again. Paying attention to values here. I want to make sure that the clouds are darker than the white water. Only slightly, but still. It's important to get the value relationships accurate. I've switched over to a number 8 natural bristle flat. This brush holds more paint, so I can cover the panel quickly. In reality, the roofs are kind of a gray color, but I am going to warm them up. And I may add a bit more red to them, we'll see. I love painting in this location, but there are several challenges. One, it's near a small airport. Two, there are a lot of really loud birds in this neighborhood. And three, it tends to be very windy over here. But even with all those challenges, it's still worth it. One of my favorite spots to paint. Got some pure titanium white here. For the white water and the waves, and the white is picking up some of the surrounding colors, so it's not really a pure titanium white. Again, the most important thing at this point is just the value, trying to create an interesting pattern. I do have my doubts as to whether this painting will work or not, and I think if it fails, it's because it's too much information on too small of a panel. All right, so at this point the composition is blocked in, and I'm just stepping back about 10 or 15 feet to decide if there's anything I want to change, and I think I'm just going to keep going. It is a complicated composition, but I knew that from the start, and so I'm just going to push through and see what happens. I heard that Bob Ross would do 3 versions of the paintings that he painted on his program. So he would work out all the problems before going on camera. That's actually not a bad idea, but I don't ever do that. I just go for it, and if the painting works, great, and if it doesn't, that's okay too. And as I've mentioned before, there has never been a time where I've done a painting, filmed the process, and not posted it. I always post my paintings whether they succeed or fail. I feel like there's a lot to be learned when paintings don't work out. I mean, that's what I should say, not fail, when they don't work out as well as you might have hoped. I think it's good to experiment, and that's what I'm doing today. I really do enjoy experimenting. In order to grow as an artist, you've got to be willing to take chances. As for medium, I am using a bit of liquid today, but not much. And so I only put a little bit out into my palette cup, and so far the smell has not been overwhelming. I really do love the way liquid makes the paint handle. And one of the advantages of the wind is that it helps to blow the fumes away. Last month I experimented by pushing color, and gradually my color choices have migrated back to my previous approach to color. Although I will say that even though I did return to my previous approach to color, I'm pushing color more than I used to. It was a worthwhile exercise because I realized that my colors were really desaturated. And it became really obvious when I compared my color experiments to my older paintings. All right, so here's what I finished up with. This painting took about 2.5 hours to complete. It was finished on site. As I mentioned during the painting process, I had doubts about this painting. I was not sure it was going to work out. My fear was that the composition was a bit too complicated for this size panel. The panel is a 16 by 24, and although that's not a small panel necessarily, it did feel a bit cramped. However, by reducing the size of my brush, I think I was able to keep the painting feeling loose. My goal was to have a nice balance between looseness and structure, especially since there were buildings included in the painting. That can always be a challenge, having something that's more structural fit into a loose composition, if that makes sense. So I did try to keep the details on the buildings to a minimum. There's some railings suggested on the porch here and then a couple of chimneys. But for the most part, the buildings are very simplified. And I think by using the No. 4 natural bristle flat for the entire painting, there is some brushwork continuity in this painting. And so I'm pleasantly surprised. I think it worked out. And like I said, I was not expecting that to happen. But I have learned over the years to keep pushing through, and when the voice of doubt pops into your head, just ignore it and keep going. When I first started painting, I was really inspired by the plein air watercolors of Edward Hopper, in particular the paintings of houses by the ocean. However, here in California, as I mentioned, there aren't many houses by the ocean, and the houses that are by the ocean tend to be more modern, maybe built in the 1950s. The architecture is not quite as nice as it is in New England or the Northeast. However, as I mentioned, I was pleasantly surprised by the way this painting turned out. And I think by suggesting the houses and not getting into too much detail, I think it does work out. It creates a world that is maybe connected to reality, and yet it's still filtered through my what shall we say, my artistic sensibilities, for lack of a better description. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. It's the Patreon support that helps keep me making these videos, and it's much appreciated. I've also put a PayPal tip jar down below too, so check it out. Other than that, stay creative. I'll see you guys in the next video.